Dad, sleep in the garage. My son didn't whisper it. He didn't shout it either. He said it like he was suggesting I move my car out of the driveway for a few hours. It was 7:34 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I was sitting at my own kitchen table, halfway through a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. His wife, Lauren, stood beside him holding a stapled 3-page grocery list. 40 of my relatives are coming for Thanksgiving, she said, tapping the paper against her palm. We're going to need the master bedroom for my parents. 40. I looked at the list. 14 turkeys. 8 pies. 6 folding tables. Where exactly, I asked calmly, do you expect me to sleep? In the garage, my son repeated, like I hadn't heard him the first time. Just for the week. We'll clear a space. It's heated. It is a strange moment when your child begins speaking about your house as if you're a temporary guest in it. I have lived in that house for 43 years. I built the deck with my own hands in 1989. I refinanced it twice and paid it off completely the year I turned 67. The deed was transferred into the Lawson family trust after Margaret died. I am the sole trustee. But none of that was mentioned at the kitchen table. Lauren slid the grocery list toward me. We'll need you to handle shopping, she said, and probably prep most of it. You know how to cook for a crowd. I looked at the second page. Cranberries, green beans, 40 dinner rolls, 3 industrial-sized aluminum trays. Lauren, I said gently, this isn't a hotel. She blinked. Well, it kind of is, she said lightly, for the holidays. My son gave a tight smile. It's just easier this way, Dad. Easier. That word is dangerous when it starts rearranging someone else's life. For whom? I asked. For everyone, he replied quickly. I folded the grocery list in half. And you believe that includes me? Silence. Lauren glanced at my son, then back at me. You don't need that big bedroom anymore, she said. It's just practical. Practical. There's something about being told you don't need. What you built that rearranges something inside you. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I smiled. Perfect, I said. Lauren looked relieved. Great. I knew you, understand. I do, I replied. You two can handle cooking, cleaning, and hosting. Their smiles hesitated. I'm leaving. The room shifted. What do you mean, leaving? My son asked. I've booked a room at the Lakeside Inn, I said, for the entire week. Lauren's brow tightened. That's dramatic. No, I said evenly. It's practical. You're abandoning your family on Thanksgiving, she asked. No, I replied. I'm declining to be reassigned in my own house. That was the first crack. But it wasn't the real fracture. The real fracture came when I walked into the garage later that evening to retrieve a folding chair. They had already started rearranging it. The workbench had been pushed against the wall. A twin mattress leaned against the toolbox. A portable heater sat unplugged on the floor. They hadn't just discussed the idea. They had begun implementing it. That told me everything. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the mattress. It wasn't humiliation that rose in me. It was clarity. This wasn't about sleeping arrangements. This was about gradual repositioning. About moving me one step at a time. Bedroom to garage. Host to helper. Owner to occupant. And Thanksgiving was just the excuse. The next morning, I drove to the bank. Sandra had been my branch manager for 12 years. Thomas, she said as I stepped into her office, you look steady. I am. I hear a but. I need copies of the trust certification and property records. Everything okay? Yes, I said. Everything is becoming clear. She printed the documents without hesitation. Your home is fully paid off, she said. Held in trust, you remain sole trustee. I know. Is someone questioning that? Someone is testing it. She didn't ask more. She didn't need to. On my way home, I called my attorney. Elaine, I said, hypothetically, if someone were trying to slowly reposition me inside my own property, what would you advise? She paused. Has there been a transfer attempt? No. A power of attorney discussion? Not yet. Then document everything. I intend to. When I returned home, Lauren was measuring the living room. Just figuring out table placement, she said cheerfully. For 40 people. Yes. I nodded slowly. And the master bedroom. She didn't hesitate. We'll move your things into the guest room by Friday. I smiled again. Actually, I said calmly, we won't. My son stepped in. Dad, don't start. I'm not starting, I replied. I'm clarifying. Clarifying what? That this house is not a shared timeshare. Lauren crossed her arms. We're family. Yes, I said, and families ask. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was thin. Lauren broke it first. You're overreacting. No, I said quietly. I'm observing. I walked past them into the master bedroom and opened the closet. My suitcases were already sitting on the floor. Empty. They hadn't asked. They had assumed. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about Thanksgiving. This was about entitlement gaining momentum. And momentum, if not interrupted, becomes precedent. I zipped one suitcase shut. Not because I was conceding. Because I was preparing. There is a difference. When someone believes you are temporary in your own home, you do not argue loudly. You gather proof quietly. Because I had a feeling this wasn't the last conversation we were going to have about where I belonged. And next time, I intended to have paper in my hand before they had tape measure in theirs. The mattress stayed in the garage. I left it there. Not because I intended to use it, but because I wanted to see how far they would go without resistance. There is a particular kind of clarity that comes when you stop arguing and start observing. By Wednesday morning, Lauren had taped a printed schedule to the refrigerator. Turkey prep, Dad. Pie station, Dad. Garage setup, Brian. Bedroom switch, Friday. Bedroom switch. It was written in permanent marker. I stood there reading it while Lauren poured coffee into a travel mug. You'll need to pick up the cranberry crates today, she said. The wholesale place closes at 5. I won't be going, I replied calmly. She paused. What do you mean? I've made other arrangements. Like what? I've rented the Lakeside Inn from Sunday through Saturday. She stared at me as if I had announced a tropical cruise. You're serious? Yes. You're abandoning us right before Thanksgiving. No, I said. I'm declining reassignment. Brian entered the kitchen just then. What's going on? Your dad thinks he's staying in a hotel, Lauren said. I am, I replied. Brian rubbed his forehead. Dad, this isn't about power. It is precisely about power, I said quietly. He didn't respond to that. Instead, he shifted the conversation. Look, if you're uncomfortable in the garage, we can rearrange something. The discomfort isn't physical, I said. It's positional. That word seemed to irritate Lauren more than anything else I'd said. "We're trying to include you," she insisted. "In the garage." Silence. I walked to my desk and opened the folder I had brought back from the bank the day before. The trust certification sat neatly on top, the deed copy beneath it. Property tax statements, insurance coverage summaries. Paper has weight when used correctly. That afternoon, I called David. He answered on the second ring. "Everything okay?" he asked immediately. "Depends on your definition," I replied. I explained the situation without embellishment. "They want you in the garage," he said. "Yes." "For 40 guests." "Yes." "Are you selling?" "No." "Do they think you are?" "I believe they think I will." David was quiet for a moment. "Dad," he said slowly, "this feels like something else." "It is." "What are you going to do?" "Document." "Do you need me there?" "Not yet." David understood what not yet meant. On Thursday morning, Lauren came into the living room holding a paint sample card. "I was thinking we could freshen up the master before my parents arrive," she said casually. "My master?" I asked. "Well, yes. It's easier than moving furniture twice." "And you decided this when?" "After dinner, Tuesday." I nodded. "So, without asking." She exhaled. "You're being rigid." "I'm being consistent." The pattern was becoming clear. Decision first, explanation second, assumption always. By Friday, they had moved several boxes from the master closet into the hallway. Not mine. Theirs. They were making space. That's when I understood something important. This wasn't about 1 week. It was about precedent. If I slept in the garage for Thanksgiving, the house dynamic shifted permanently. Guest becomes dependent. Dependent becomes unnecessary. Unnecessary becomes transitional. I packed one suitcase. Not for the garage. For the lakeside inn. And I left it by the front door. On Saturday afternoon, the first carload of Lauren's relatives arrived early. 2 SUVs pulled into the driveway. Her cousin stepped out with a casserole dish and a loud laugh. "Where's the master?" he asked cheerfully as he stepped inside. Lauren pointed toward the hallway. "This way." No hesitation. No introduction. No acknowledgement of me. I stood in the living room, watching strangers walk past my study. "Thomas," one of them said vaguely, as if addressing a neighbor. I smiled politely. Lauren's mother arrived next. "Well," she said, surveying the house, "it's cozy." Cozy. I had refinished those floors myself. By Sunday morning, the house felt like an event venue. Chairs stacked in corners, coolers by the back door, folding tables leaning against walls. Lauren handed me a clipboard. "Can you start peeling potatoes?" she asked. "No," I replied. Her eyes narrowed. "We talked about this." "Yes," I said, "you talked." Brian stepped in. "Dad, please don't make this awkward." "I won't," I said. And I picked up my suitcase. The room paused. "Where are you going?" Lauren demanded. "To the lakeside inn." "In the middle of preparation." "Yes." "You can't just leave." "I can." Brian followed me to the door. "Dad, this is embarrassing." "Sleeping in the garage would be embarrassing," I replied. He didn't argue. Because he knew. I stepped outside. The driveway was crowded with unfamiliar vehicles. I placed my suitcase in the trunk of my car and closed it gently. As I turned back toward the house, I noticed something new. A contractor's truck parked across the street. Oak Ridge Realty printed on the side. Mark Reynolds stepped out of the driver's seat. He wasn't carrying a folder this time. He was carrying a measuring tape. My stomach didn't drop. It steadied. He walked toward the house, glanced at the gathering crowd, and then saw me standing by my car. "Mr. Lawson," he said carefully, "I didn't expect." "Expect what?" I asked. He hesitated. "Your daughter mentioned a possible listing consultation after the holidays." After the holidays. So that was the timeline. Thanksgiving displacement. December listing. January transition. The garage was not temporary. It was rehearsal. I walked toward him calmly. "You have documentation authorizing that?" I asked. "No," he admitted, "not yet." "Then you have nothing." He nodded once. "I won't proceed without your signature." Good. Lauren had stepped onto the porch by then. "What's going on?" she asked sharply. "Nothing," I said evenly. Mark met her eyes. "I can't move forward without Mr. Lawson." Her expression shifted. "Move forward with what?" one of her cousins called from inside. Silence. The narrative had just fractured. And this time, I had not raised my voice. I looked at Brian. "You told me this was about safety." He looked away. Mark folded his measuring tape slowly. "I'll be leaving," he said. He got back into his truck and drove off. The house behind me felt different now. Not invaded. Exposed. Lauren stepped down from the porch. "You're overreacting again," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm early." Early for what? For understanding the plan. Brian's shoulders sagged slightly. There it was. The quiet confirmation. They had not only prepared the garage. They had prepared the sale. And they had assumed I would go along quietly. I closed the trunk again and walked back toward the house. I did not leave. Not yet. Because leaving now would confirm their assumption. Instead, I set the suitcase down in the hallway and walked into the kitchen. 40 relatives were in the living room laughing over football. The master bedroom door was open. My closet half emptied. I stood in the center of it all and understood something clearly. They thought I was the obstacle. They had not considered that I was the authority. And authority does not sleep in the garage. It rewrites the arrangement. Quietly. With documents. And timing. And I was about to change the timing. I did not confront anyone that afternoon. That was the first thing that surprised Brian. He expected anger, or a dramatic exit, or a public accusation in front of Lauren's 40 relatives and their casserole dishes. Instead, I stepped into my study, closed the door, and made 3 phone calls. The first was to Elaine. The realtor was here again, I told her. With paperwork. No. With measurements. She paused. That's anticipatory. Yes. Do you have the trust certification on hand? Yes. Good. We'll need to formalize something. Such as a recorded notice. That phrase steadied me. The second call was to David. They brought the realtor back, I said. Without you signing anything. Yes. He exhaled slowly. You want me there? Yes. He did not hesitate. I'll book a flight. The third call was to Sandra at the bank. I need a notarized copy of the trust certification and property records, I said. You're moving quickly, she replied. I'm moving precisely. That night, I did sleep in the master bedroom. No one mentioned the garage again. But the house felt different, less like a home, more like a negotiation. By Monday morning, David was in the driveway. He walked through the front door with the same steady posture he's had since he was 17. Lauren looked surprised. "David, what are you doing here?" "Visiting my father," he said simply. The tone was not aggressive, just factual. He stepped into the study with me and closed the door. "They really tried to measure the house?" he asked. "Yes." "And you didn't sign anything?" "No." He nodded. "Good." We spent 2 hours reviewing documents. The trust language was clear. The house could not be listed, transferred, or encumbered without my direct written authorization as sole trustee. But clarity in private means little if narrative in public is distorted. That afternoon, I asked Lauren and Brian to sit down. David remained in the room. 40 relatives were still occupying the house, but they were out running errands or visiting nearby parks. It was just the four of us. "I want to make something explicit," I said calmly. Lauren folded her arms. Brian leaned forward. "You brought a realtor here without my consent," I continued. "You began rearranging my bedroom. You discussed listing the property after the holidays." "That's not what," Lauren began. "It is exactly what happened," I said quietly. Silence. David slid the trust certification across the table. "Read it," he said. Lauren didn't touch it. Brian did. He read the first paragraph. Then the second. He swallowed. "It's in a trust," he said. "Yes." "And you're the sole trustee." "Yes." Lauren's voice rose slightly. "We weren't trying to steal anything." "I didn't say steal," I replied. "You're implying it." "I'm clarifying it. There is a difference." Brian looked up from the paper. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying the house is not transitional property. It is not a shared inheritance in advance. It is not subject to holiday scheduling." Lauren's jaw tightened. "You're overreacting." David spoke this time. "No, he's protecting." Lauren looked at him sharply. "You don't live here." "That's precisely why I see it clearly," he said. The room grew quiet again. I placed another document on the table. It was a draft notice prepared by Elaine that morning. Notice of affirmation of trust authority. It stated clearly that any attempted listing or representation of ownership by non-trustees would be invalid and subject to legal response. "You went to a lawyer?" Brian asked. "Yes." "You think we're criminals." "I think you're confused about boundaries." Lauren stood abruptly. "This is humiliating." "No," I said calmly. "Humiliation is being told to sleep in the garage." Her face flushed. The silence that followed felt different from Thanksgiving. Heavier. Because this time, the documents were not symbolic. They were preventive. David broke it. "If you want to host Thanksgiving, host it," he said evenly, "but not by displacing the owner." Lauren's eyes flickered. Owner. The word had not been spoken aloud before. That was the moment the narrative shifted. Not emotionally. Structurally. Over the next 2 days, something subtle happened. The tone changed. Lauren stopped referring to our house. She began saying, "your house." Brian stopped discussing timelines. He started asking about logistics. "Do you want us to scale back?" he asked one evening. "Yes," I replied. "How much?" "Cut it in half." 40 became 20. The folding tables disappeared. The garage mattress was removed. No one apologized yet, but posture shifted, and posture reveals understanding before words do. On Wednesday afternoon, something unexpected happened. Mark Reynolds called me directly. "Mr. Lawson," he said carefully, "I want to clarify something." "Go ahead." "I received a follow-up inquiry from your son-in-law about pre-listing preparation." "I see." "I declined." "Thank you." "And I documented that no listing discussion can occur without your signature." "That's correct." He hesitated. "I've been in this business for 20 years, he said. "When families move this fast without the owner, it rarely ends well." Noted. That was the third-party confirmation I needed. Not because I doubted myself, because narrative dissolves under external validation. That evening, Brian approached me alone in the backyard. The oak tree cast long shadows across the grass. "I didn't think you'd push back this hard," he admitted. "I didn't push," I said. "I clarified. You scared Lauren. She scared me first." He nodded. "We weren't trying to take over. You were rehearsing." He didn't deny it. "That's fair," he said quietly. Fair. That word had returned. On Thanksgiving morning, the house felt calmer. 20 guests instead of 40. No garage mattress. No measuring tape. Lauren's parents stayed in the guest room. I remained in the master bedroom. And at dinner, when one of Lauren's cousins joked, "So when are you selling this place?" Brian responded before I could. "That's not happening." The room quieted. Dad's staying exactly where he is. That was not an apology, but it was a correction. And corrections, spoken publicly, carry weight. The story was not finished, because apology requires acknowledgement of motive, and motive requires honesty. But something essential had shifted. The house no longer felt like contested ground. It felt like authority restored. Quietly, with paper, with witnesses, with timing. And the real conversation was about to happen. Not about square footage, not about safety, but about fear, and who it truly belonged to. The apology didn't come at the table. It came 2 days later, after the leftovers were packed into containers and the last relative had driven away. The house was quiet again. Not the tense quiet of anticipation. The steady quiet of ownership. Emily stood in the kitchen doorway while I washed a plate. She didn't sit. She didn't rehearse. She simply said, "Dad, I need to say this clearly." I dried my hands and turned to face her. "I was wrong," she said. "Not about worrying, about controlling." Brian stepped in behind her. "And I pushed it," he added. "I kept saying it was about safety, but it was about fear." "Fear of what?" I asked. Emily swallowed. "Losing you," she said, "and losing what you built." There it was. Not greed. Not theft. Fear of instability. Fear of absence. Fear of the moment when inheritance stops being theoretical. "Fear doesn't give you authority," I said gently. "I know," she replied. "And I confused access with ownership," Brian admitted. "The garage, the realtor, that was us trying to move things forward before they needed to move." "Before I was ready," I corrected. "Yes." Silence settled between us. Not defensive. Not charged. Honest. "I never intended to displace you," Emily said. "I thought I was preventing something worse." "You were preventing uncertainty," I replied, "by creating certainty for yourselves." She nodded slowly. "That's true." Apologies that include truth carry weight. I forgive you, I said. Not because the words were expected. Because they were deserved. Forgiveness does not erase what happened. It defines how it continues. Over the following weeks, the dynamic shifted in ways that were visible but subtle. Emily stopped making plans without asking. She began framing suggestions differently. Would you like help with this? Instead of, we're going to do this. Brian stopped speaking about what's practical. He started asking what felt right. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady. That steadiness mattered. In December, I met again with Elaine. Not because I was angry. Because clarity deserves reinforcement. I want to update the trust, I said. Elaine nodded. What kind of update? I want to add a clause requiring written consent from both beneficiaries before any listing discussion can occur during my lifetime. She looked up. That's firm. Yes. Do you want to remove them? No. Then this protects structure without punishment. Exactly. Punishment breeds resentment. Structure breeds stability. I told Emily about the amendment afterward. She didn't argue. That's fair, she said. That word again, I replied. Fair, she repeated. You built it, you decide it. That sentence was more important than any apology. Authority acknowledged voluntarily is stronger than authority defended under pressure. By January, something else had changed. The house no longer felt like a project. It felt like a home again. The garage was back to being a garage. The master bedroom was untouched. The oak tree still dropped leaves across the driveway, and no one measured it. One afternoon, Brian came by alone. I need to ask you something, he said. Go ahead. When you smiled that night and said perfect, what were you thinking? That you were moving too fast. And that you'd stop us. No. That I'd document. He leaned back in the chair. You never yelled. Yelling is for losing control, I said. I wasn't losing control. He nodded. I've been thinking about that. About what? That I was so sure I was right. That's usually the first sign someone is. He laughed quietly. Not defensive. Reflective. In February, David visited again. We sat at the dining table, reviewing the updated trust documents. It's tighter now, he said. Yes. You don't think that's harsh? No. Why? Because clarity prevents imagination. He smiled. That's a line. Keep it, I replied. Clarity prevents imagination. Imagination fills gaps with fear. Fear fills gaps with control. Control fills gaps with displacement. It's a simple chain. Break it early, and you don't have to repair it later. The next Thanksgiving arrived without incident. No measuring tape. No garage mattress. No grocery list thrown across the table. Emily asked 2 weeks in advance how many guests would feel comfortable. 20. We agreed on 20. No one mentioned safety. No one mentioned selling. At dinner, Brian raised a glass. To Dad, he said, for teaching us that calm is stronger than force. I didn't respond with a speech. I nodded, because the lesson was already learned. After dessert, Emily lingered again. I didn't realize how quickly we were shifting you, she said. You were shifting yourselves, I replied. What do you mean? You were trying to control the future because you were afraid of it. She was quiet. That's true. And the future doesn't arrive faster just because you measure it. She smiled faintly. I guess not. There are moments when reconciliation feels earned. Not because everyone agrees, but because everyone understands. The house is still mine. Legally, structurally, but more importantly, relationally. Not because I fought harder, because I stayed steady. If you're listening to this and someone has told you you're not safe living alone anymore, pause before you react. Ask yourself, is the concern based on evidence or fear? Are the suggestions collaborative or presumptive? Are decisions being discussed or assumed? Set down the fork. Reach for the document. Clarify before you confront. Because anger escalates, paper stabilizes, and dignity is preserved through composure. My daughter was not my enemy. She was afraid. My son-in-law was not greedy. He was impatient. And fear plus impatience creates pressure. Pressure creates mistakes. But mistakes can be corrected when truth is presented calmly. The house still stands. The trust still holds. And Thanksgiving dinner is once again about turkey instead of timelines. That is enough. If this story resonated with you, remember this. Ownership is not arrogance. Boundaries are not rejection. And authority, when exercised calmly, does not fracture families. It strengthens them. Stay steady. Stay documented. Stay present. And let clarity do the heavy lifting.